Now that we have a domain name registered, let's talk about managing domain names and their DNS zone files. One of the biggest things that web designers struggle with when they are first starting out is managing domain names. They are great at making websites, but when it comes to complex issues with domains, they get completely stuck, having to turn away projects or spending way too much time on something that should only take 5 minutes. Let's go over some common scenarios that you will normally encounter. Scenario number 1, different registrar and different hosting. This is a very common scenario that occurs, and some people have the misconception that both the domain name and the web hosting have to be at the same place with the same provider. I like it when they are both under one provider so that it is easier to manage, but domain names and web hosting are two completely different things, and they don't have to be together. Therefore, a domain name can be registered with any company that is a registrar, and it can be pointed to any other server or web hosting company. So let's say that you have a domain name with GoDaddy and you have web hosting with Bluehost. In order to point the domain name from GoDaddy to Bluehost, we would have to switch the domain name servers to the server we would want it to go to. So let's go ahead and try it with our own domain name that we just registered, and let's make sure that our domain name is pointing to our web server. So first we have to figure out what our name servers are for our web hosting server, and we can find that information in our new account information email that you received when you registered for your web hosting account. And if we scroll down to the close to the bottom under server information, you will notice that it'll give us our name servers. In this case, they are ns1npowerhosting.com and ns2npowerhosting.com. Name servers will always have two separate NS records, typically NS1 and NS2, and all we need to do to point your domain name to any server is just change the name servers, and within 24 to 48 hours, most of the time a lot less, it will point over to that specific server. For example, let's say if you had a domain name with maybe GoDaddy and you wanted to point it to your student hosting, you would just change the name servers and add the domain name as an alias in your cPanel, and there it is. So let's try it with our domain name, and let's make sure that it is pointing to our correct server. So I'm in my dashboard, in my bridge dashboard, and I'm simply just going to click over here on domains. And under domains, you will see that I have my domain name, fluenceweb.com. And regardless of where you register your domain name, you will always have the option of managing its name servers. So if we click this little drop down over here and we click manage name servers, so here we notice it gives us our option for our name servers. And here you can see it tells you can change where your domain points to here. Please be aware changes can take up to 24 hours to propagate. So here we have use custom name servers. Mine are already matching to what my new account information email said. So they're already set to ns1npowerhosting.com, ns2npowerhosting.com. Just make sure that yours are matching whatever your welcome email says. If not, you're going to have issues and your domain name's not going to be popping up. So once they're matching, you're going to put them in and hit change name servers, and you should be set. Now let's take a look at scenario 2, redirecting only the website through the use of an A record. When you point over the name server NS1, NS2, you are handing over the complete control of the domain name zone over to that specific hosting account. Now, there are scenarios where, for various reasons, your client might only want to reroute the A record or just the www part of it, but keep the rest of the zone files pointing to the same server. This typically happens when they have a lot of email on that server or a certain software that they would like to keep using, or simply they are not ready to migrate over. In this case, we can keep the domain zone files as is, and instead of pointing and switching over the name servers completely, we will only switch the A record of the domain name, keeping everything else in place, but when a user would type in the domain, it would point to the server where the website is located. Remember to always ask your clients how they handle their email before completely switching name servers, or you could possibly disrupt everything. Now let's take a look at how we would switch an A record. So like we were mentioning, if I wanted to take this domain, keep the email, FTP, everything else on this server, but I just wanted to point the web address, the domain name, to another website, what I would do, we could do that by going through our domain section and selecting DNS zone editor. This will give us access to access the DNS zones. When I click on it, you'll notice you'll have your domain name fluenceweb.com, and you'll have your records here. So I have my A record, I could add a CNAME record, MX record, and I could hit manage and see all of them. Here you could take a look at your DNS zone file, and it'll list all your records and where they're pointing. So now we notice fluenceweb.com, my A record is pointing to this IP address, right? My MX record is pointing to this destination. MX is for mail exchange. I have my FTP is pointing to a common name, which is just reroutes it back to Fluence. So if I would want to edit this record to go my domain to point somewhere else, just the www part of it, I would modify this name record right here by selecting edit and typing in the new IP address I would want it to go to. In this case, we don't want it to go anywhere new. I'm just going to leave it as is. Scenario number 3, redirecting only the email. This scenario is almost opposite of scenario number 2. A client might only want to redirect their email to another provider, but keep their website as is. With the increase in popularity of other business email solutions like Office 365 and Google Apps, this is becoming very, very common. To accomplish this, we would simply modify the MX records of the DNS zone file. Now let's take a look at how we would change the MX records. Again, we would go over to our zone editor, look for a domain that we want to manage. I would hit manage. We would look for our MX records and we would edit those MX records. And depending on the provider that the client is switching to, so let's say if they're going with Office 365, there would be other records that they might have to add, but MX records, it's going to be the main one. Google Apps as well, I believe they have like 4 or 5 with different priorities. And in this case, again, we're not making any changes just yet. And we hit cancel. And that's how we would accomplish scenario number 3. And lastly, we have scenario number 4, domain name transfers. In some scenarios, a client might not want to have 2 separate accounts, or you might need to transfer a domain name to another registrar. To do this, you need to accomplish the following. First, we need to acquire the domain EPP code, or the transfer code. This code is set in place to make sure that people don't steal domains. So in order to transfer a domain from one registrar to the other, or one owner to the other, you need this code. You also need to make sure that that domain name is unlocked. You would then start a transfer, a domain name transfer from the new registrar.